Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I never thought I'd confess this out loud. It begins on a stretch of County Road 47, just past midnight, when the sky hangs black and motionless above the fields. There's no moon, and the radio drips with static, the kind that crawls through your bones when your ears adjust to the dark. I'm in my cruiser, engine idling, waiting for a noise complaint at the old Jenkins place. Up ahead, a single, broken streetlight sputters on and off. The gravel under my tires crunches like bones as I pull to a stop. Inside the house, they say, a late-night radio show played until 4, then dropped to silence. They called it a safe refuge, but I knew better. Silence is never safe. At 12:05 a.m., dispatch crackled, "Unit 3, check a 911 hang up at 449 Elmwood Drive. Call disconnects twice." My knuckles whiten on the wheel as I punch the address into GPS. Elmwood is a narrow lane, flanked by cornfields on one side, a dense line of pines on the other. As I drive, the static in my ear grows louder, then falls away, like someone breathing just beyond the tree line. I slow to 20 miles per hour. Up ahead, a mailbox sits crooked, its flag half raised. No house number, just darkness. Tree limbs brush the roof of the cruiser as I approach. I park 30 feet from the front porch. The radio is dead now. No dispatch chatter. Nothing but the drone of bugs beyond the windshield. I step out, and the air tastes of damp earth and fertilizer. In the faint glow of my flashlight, the porch steps are splintered, boards warped. The window beside the front door is cracked, only by an inch or two, yet I see no light inside. My breath clouds in the beam. I knock once, twice. No answer. I call over the PA. "Police. Anyone home?" My voice sounds hollow. My own echo carries back at me. Before I can knock again, the front door clicks open from within. It moves inward silently as if waiting for me. I pause, hand on holster. "Hello?" The darkness beyond the threshold feels thick, like velvet wrapped around my boots. My flashlight beam dances along the hallway walls. Old family portraits, their eyes faded to shadows. I step in. The door closes behind me with a muffled thud. I spin, slam my shoulder into it, but it doesn't budge. The knob won't turn. My radio is on my belt, but when I tap the button, only dead air answers. The beam of my flashlight picks out footprints in the dusty carpet. Bare, human, leading deeper into the house. I follow them. The living room is a cavern of couches covered in sheets. The window blinds are drawn tight, but between slats I catch a flicker, something moving. I edge toward it. The blinds rattle softly. I push them apart, and for an instant I see a shape retreat down a hallway, tall, thin, like a scarecrow. My heart spikes in my throat. I call out, "Stop right there!" No response. I advance. At the end of the hall, the footsteps stop. A single lamp in the corner clicks on, low warm light spilling over peeling wallpaper. The footprints end at that lamp. There's no one around it. On the coffee table, a cell phone rings. I glance at the ID. It reads my own badge number, 1237. My stomach twists. I pick up, static, then softly, a voice I know. "You're safe," it says. Slow, deliberate, the voice of someone dead. A pause. Then, "Are you sure?" The line goes dead. The lamp's light flashes once and dies. plunging me into darkness. I drop the phone, drawing my weapon. I fire a round into the air. Each echo rings like a tolling bell. No answer. Only the faint drip of water somewhere in the back. I retreat, backtracking through the hall. The door won't open. I'm trapped. My radio still silent. Then the lights flicker on all at once. Kitchen, hallway, living room. Bulbs hum, casting everything in stark focus. I see walls scrawled with chalk. Names, Carla Monroe, Jake Tennyson, Rita Drexel, surrounded by arrows pointing at me. Beneath each, a date. Every call I'd answered in the last 6 months. And then one that was blank, just a dash. My chest goes numb. The lights click off. My flashlight is gone. I'm in total blackness. The house sighs around me. Floors creaking, pipes groaning. The static of silences breathing. I back against the hallway wall, sliding down until I'm seated on the dusty floor. My hand finds my belt. My fingers close on nothing. Fear twists my gut. Then a soft scraping behind me. The front door opening. I push myself to my feet, heart racing so loud it drowns out everything. In the doorway stands a figure. Tall, shoulders slightly stooped, face hidden in shadow. I recognize the shape of his patrol cap. A slow voice. Familiar. Lieutenant Marston? I stammer. Hello? He steps forward. The boards creak under his weight. He lifts a hand, palm up, as if offering something. A single, weathered photo. Me, taken during a birthday party for the chief's daughter. I blink. He lowers his hand. The photo tumbles to the floor, landing face up. It's dated 6 years ago, before my first night shift. On the back, in the same chalk that scrawled the other names, you were there. The figure moves closer, though the floorboards ahead remain empty. My breath hitches. He raises a finger to his lips. Shh. Then, behind me, a whisper. You forgot her. I spin, but no one's there. The front door creaks shut. The lights burst back on, glaring. In the beam, the hallway is empty. No footprints, no figure, just the chalked names and the broken phone. My radio coughs to life. Unit 3, are you okay? Over. I lean on the wall, voice trembling. I'm fine. Just got turned around. I'm heading home. I stand, wipe my palm on my pants, and walk out. The night is unchanged, cold, silent. The porch light still flickers. I slide into the cruiser and start the engine. The photo from the first house sits on the passenger seat, face up. My name scrawled on the back in chalk. I stare at it in the rearview mirror. My reflection is pale, eyes wide. The engine idles, the radio silent. Again. Behind me, through the glass, the house waits. I drove straight through the empty streets, headlights carving pale rivers through the mist. The dashboard clock glowed 3:14 a.m. My cruiser's engine hummed like an exasperated sigh. The photo on the seat caught the yellow light, my own face frozen in a smile I didn't recognize. I reached over and flipped it, thumb brushing over the chalk scrawl. You were there. My breath hitched. How could I have forgotten? The house I left behind felt miles away, and impossibly close all at once. For the next 2 hours, I patrolled with the radio off. I didn't want dispatch breaking the spell. Every turn felt like I was driving through one of my own memories. Streets I'd known for years, now exotic and dangerous under the cloak of night. I passed the grain elevator, the boarded-up diner, the skeletal remains of the county fair, its rides silent. I thought of every call I'd answered in the last year, broken taillights, stray dogs, minor disturbances, and wondered if one of them had bled into something more sinister. By 5 a.m., I was back at the precinct, heart still pounding. I parked, shut off the engine, and sat for a minute, trying to steady my breathing. The fluorescent lights in the lot flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows. I grabbed the photo and pocketed it, forcing myself into the station. The front door was locked, so I used my key card and moved down the dim hallway toward records. Even the hum of the fluorescent bulbs sounded menacing now. Records was empty, the clerk long gone for the night. I found a stack of call logs from the past 6 months, spread them across her desk, and turned off the lights. By the glow of a computer monitor, I traced every hang-up, every strange noise complaint, every report of someone hearing their name whispered in the dark. There were more than I remembered. Entries labeled 3:45 a.m., 2:12 a.m., 12:47 a.m., each with terse notes. Caller hung up mid-sentence. Caller heard breathing. Caller heard name M. Marshall. Marshall was me, my patrol name. A chill skated up my spine. I printed the logs and stapled them together. At the top, I wrote in pen, "Active suspect. Pattern? Connection to Elmwood and Jenkins calls." The handwriting looked shaky. I leaned my head on the desk, letting the silence press in. Somewhere in the station, an air compressor cycled on and off. My eyes closed. I felt dizzy, as if the walls themselves were breathing. At sunrise, I realized I'd dozed off. The clerk came in, switched on lights, and startled at the printed stack on her desk. I told her I'd left instructions for her to file them under Investigation Personal. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I gathered my things and left, the printouts folded into my jacket pocket. As I walked past the trophy display case, my reflection looked gaunter than usual. I shook my head and decided to get coffee, something to reset my mind. The diner at Main and 3rd was open 24 hours, half lit by neon coffee signs and the occasional flash of passing headlights. The place smelled of stale grease and burnt sugar from the pie warmer. I sat at a booth in the corner, ordered black coffee and a piece of cherry pie. My hands trembled as I lifted the fork. Each bite tasted like ash. I stared at the door, expecting someone, Harlan Price, Lieutenant Marston, or even myself, to slip in and sit across from me. Around 8 a.m., my partner, Detective Mills, slid into the booth. He wore a rumpled suit, tie undone. He gave me a look that balanced concern and annoyance. "You missed your briefing," he said softly. "Chief wants to know why you're digging through old hang-ups. You flagged something?" I pushed the logs across the table. He frowned at the pile. "These are every late-night call in the last 6 months?" I nodded. "Something's off, and you know it." He picked up the top sheet. "Hear your name whispered a dozen times. Marshall, I'm telling you, this reads like someone is—" He cut himself off, eyes widening. "This guy, or whoever, has been using your patrol name for months." I closed my eyes. "I know." He leaned back. "You okay?" I shook my head, fingers tightening. I'm starting to think I'm not the first officer to sit here pouring coffee at dawn because of some case that never ends. He slid a cup of steaming coffee toward me. "Drink up, then take a day off before the department schedules funeral details." He managed a half smile and left. The rest of that day passed in a haze. I went home, showered, slept for 4 uneasy hours, then drove to the Jenkins property at dusk. I circled the exterior, checking for footprints or new damage. The broken streetlight was still blinking. The porch board sagged. I tested each doorknob, still locked. I called my sergeant. "I want that photo analyzed for fingerprints," I said, "and any trace evidence from the hallway, and put a security camera up tomorrow. I'm not letting this go." Sergeant Haynes sighed. "You're really diving into this." I didn't reply. I wasn't diving in. I was drowning. That night, at 11:30 p.m., I sat in my cruiser outside Elmwood Drive again. The photo lay on the dash, face up. I watched the window crack, waiting. My radio was muted but tuned. In the distance, a dog barked, then silence. At midnight exactly, the blinds rattled. My hand closed on the holster. I popped out of the cruiser and approached the porch silently. The door clicked open, slow, deliberate. Inside, the house looked undisturbed, lights off. I switched on the porch light. It flickered twice, then stayed lit, revealing muddy prints glistening under the bulb. I stepped in with flashlight and weapon drawn. The air was thick, almost humid. I followed the prints down the hallway. Under my beam, the chalked names had been wiped clean. My name, though, was smudged, half erased. I passed the lamp corner, and there, on the carpet, the prints ended again. No further trace. My radio crackled to life with static, then a soft, single word. "Marshall." I froze. In the pit of my stomach, a whisper. "Not yet." I backed out, slammed the door, and sprinted to the cruiser. My heart thudded so hard I thought the engine would stall. I peeled out, tires throwing gravel. On the way back, I dialed dispatch. Package to evidence. Elmwood prints. Photo from Jenkins. All logs. I didn't mention the voice on the radio. I didn't answer when they asked if I was okay. Back at the station, I locked the photo and prints in a vault file marked Ghost. No official label would fit. I washed my face in the men's room mirror, eyes red, jaw clenched. A single bead of water ran down my cheek, but it felt like blood. I splashed more water, took a breath, and left without looking back. Now, weeks later, I sit alone in that same cruiser again, wrapped in darkness before my night shift begins. The dashboard clock reads 11:59 p.m. A new report has come in. An abandoned car on State Route 89. No driver, no footprints. The description: headlights left on, doors unlocked. I've been here before. My partner calls me on the radio. "Unit 3, be advised, you're clear here." No sign of foul play. A calm voice. I turn off the radio. I don't want his calm. I slide out of the cruiser, badge glinting in the moonlight. The traffic on 89 is ghostly quiet. The car looks familiar. A white sedan, grille dented, engine warm. I approach. The driver's door clicks open at my touch, yawns inward. I step in. The air smells like the diner, burnt sugar and stale grease. On the passenger seat, another photo. I recognize the edges, the yellowed paper. My partner, Detective Mills, smiling, arm around his daughter. On the back, chalk again. "She asked after you." I press my palm to my chest. My radio crackles. "Unit 3, Marshall? You copy?" I don't answer. I stare at the photo, fingers trembling. The sedan engine idles, but I'm rooted in place. Outside, the tumbleweeds shift across the asphalt. The high beams cut arcs through the fog. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howls. I know what's coming, and I'm not sure I can stand to hear it. I don't remember how long I sat there, engine ticking over, forehead pressed against the cold glass of the windshield as the photo burned into my retinas. Outside, the night stretched on, indifferent. The hum of the engine was the only heartbeat left in the world. My fingers curled into fists. I wanted to throw the photo out the window, but I knew it would wind up back in my pocket, the chalk scrawl seeping into my mind again. Finally, I opened the door. The air outside was damp, smelling faintly of ozone from distant lightning. I balanced the photo on the roof of the sedan and studied it under the moonlight. Detective Mills smiling with his daughter who had asked after me. I tried to recall the conversation, to pinpoint when she'd even mentioned my name, but it slipped away like smoke. Was it real? Did it happen? Or was it another whisper from whatever was stalking me? My breath hitched. If the chalk was right, then she had asked. The more I tried to remember, the emptier my memory became. My legs shook as I picked up the photo and slipped it into my jacket. I walked back to the cruiser, but the engine was silent when I reached it. I glanced inside, the red glow of the dashboard clock, hands frozen at 12:03 a.m. That wasn't possible. I had parked the sedan at 11:59, then approached it. Less than 10 minutes should have passed. Yet here it was, minutes later than when I'd sat in the cruiser before switching vehicles. I felt the universe tilt. My watch read 12:07 a.m. I stared at my wrist, tried to recall looking at it earlier, but it felt like a dream. I slammed the door, heart racing. I started the engine. The radio came alive with dispatch traffic. The usual. Stray dogs, neighbor disputes, a false alarm at the high school. I muted it instantly, not wanting to hear human voices when that voice might cut through. I wanted solitude, but solitude frightened me more. I flicked on the headlights and rolled out onto Route 89, heading back through the cornfields toward town. Every mile marker I passed felt like a betrayal. My own name scrawled inside me, an accusation I couldn't refute or deny. By the time I reached the precinct parking lot, it was just past 1 a.m. A single cruiser stayed under the streetlight by records, its window down, engine off. I pulled into my usual spot and climbed out. In the lot, the air was taut, alive with unseen tension. My boots made no sound on the asphalt. I glanced at the sedan's empty spot beside mine. Gone, vanished as though it never existed. Panic fluttered in my chest. I fished the keys out of my pocket and checked locks on both vehicles. All secure. I walked toward the station entrance, shoulders heavy. Tonight, I'd sworn to myself I'd get answers. I'd turn on every camera feed, interrogate the call logs, revisit every case in the last year until something made sense. The door clicked open with my badge swipe. Inside, the fluorescent lights were bright and sterile, a stark contrast to the oppressive black outside. I made for the security office. I needed the digital footage from the lot cameras. The security room door was ajar. I pushed it open. Empty chairs, silent monitors blinking into life as I entered. I keyed in the date and time. The feed showed my cruiser arriving at 11:50 p.m., but the sedan never appeared. My stomach twisted. I rewound, thinking maybe I'd misread. The timestamp flicked from 11:52 to 1:12 a.m., showing my cruiser repeatedly coming in and out of view. Once moving past the sedan spot, then again, like some loop restarting itself. Then a figure crossed behind the cruiser, tall, featureless under the streetlight. The timestamp blurred. 12:03 a.m. exactly. The figure reached into the sedan spot, retrieved something, and vanished. I paused the footage, heart hammering. I zoomed in. The shape wore a uniform, my uniform. The angle hid the cap, but the shoulders sloped the same way mine did after years behind the wheel. The figure lifted an arm and handed something back into thin air. I leaned closer. The motion was deliberate, a slow offering. Then the figure turned away, walking into darkness. My hands shook as I shut off the monitor. The room felt suffocating. I stumbled out, head spinning. Down the hall, a light spilled from the bullpen. Detective Mills was at his desk, rearranging papers. He looked up, startled to see me. "Marshal," he said, blinking. "Everything okay?" I closed the security door behind me, leaning against it. "Did you ever see something impossible on the cameras? Anything you couldn't explain?" His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I told him about the sedan, about the timestamp, about the figure, his face drained of color. "You've seen yourself?" he whispered. I nodded. "I don't understand. It's like I never left the cruiser, and like I was never here, like both." He rubbed his face. "This is heavy, Marshal. We need to take this to the chief." I felt a wash of relief that someone else would carry this burden, but then doubt crept back. What if he thinks I've lost it? What if he thinks I'm staging it? His eyes met mine. He'll want results. Let's get the rest of the footage, outside Elmwood, Jenkins, everywhere. Then we confront it. I left him there and headed for records again. I needed the original prints from Elmwood, the broken phone, the logs. I retrieved the file I'd labeled Ghost, unlocked it, and spread the contents on the record clerk's desk. Prints, logs, photo. I closed the vault, then stared at the sealed case files I hadn't even touched. Cold cases, silent ones, dozens of 911 hang-ups with no resolution. I wondered how many had slipped through the cracks. How many callers hung up mid-sentence because they heard their own names whispered back at them. I spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing addresses with personnel records. Night shift nurses, orderlies, contractors, anyone with access to patient data. My eyes burned by the end, but I found a thread. A contract cleaner named Emery Quinn, who worked nights and visited Elmwood, Jenkins, and others on the list, ostensibly to empty trash and clean restrooms. I pulled Quinn's file. No offenses, no complaints. Just a background check that cleared him. A chill settled in my gut. He shouldn't exist. If Quinn is real, then he's the ghost pulling strings. But if he's not, what does that make me? I called dispatch for Quinn's address. The dispatcher found nothing. No Quinn in the system, no social security number, no records. No one had ever hired him, not officially. It was as if he'd been there for years without appearing on any paperwork. I sank into a chair, adrenaline ebbing into exhaustion. The station was empty now, save for the hum of the computers. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, a height reminder that the world moved on. I closed my eyes. The names, Carver, Monroe, Tennyson, Drexel, echoed in my mind, and beneath them, my own, Marshall. Didn't ask for closure, just a reason. I opened my eyes. On the desk, the security office door stood ajar again, though I'd closed it. The corridor beyond was dark, empty. A soft scrape sounded, like shoes on linoleum, somewhere down the hall. My breath lodged in my throat. I reached for my radio, thumb hovering over the button. Then, barely above a whisper, the corridor answered. "Go on." I froze, heart lodged in my ears, the unsolved weight of every unanswered call pressing down. I pulled into the lot behind the precinct just past first watch, headlights illuminating the cracked asphalt like pale eyes. The photo lay heavy in my jacket pocket, pressing against my rib cage with each heartbeat. Inside the station, the glow of the bullpen windows flickered under fluorescent hum. I sat in my cruiser for a long minute, engine ticking, debating whether to step out or drive until dawn. But I'd promised Detective Mills I'd press on, and I meant to keep that promise. Grabbing the file from the back seat, I stepped into the lobby. The front desk clerk looked up, startled to see me in uniform so late. I offered a curt nod and slipped past toward records. Each footstep echoed, my boots tapping against tile, reminding me that sounds carried in empty buildings. In records, I cleared a space on a counter and laid out the evidence. Elmwood prints, Jenkins' photo, the printed call logs, and the file labeled Ghost. The clerk watched from the doorway, curious but too polite to interrupt. I opened the Ghost file and began pulling older cold call logs, cases tagged No Suspect, caller hung up, false alarm, and other catch-all labels. I sorted them by address, matching them to the personnel roster. Each time I thought I found a pattern, names overlapping, dates aligning, I hit a dead end. Quinn didn't officially exist. Price was untraceable. Now, Quinn and Price both haunted every address on my list, but left no record beyond the chalk scrawl on doors and walls and the footprints that never continued. I scrawled a new note on an index card. Target list equals all night shift staff plus patrol push-ins. Under it, I jotted Quinn's name with a question mark, Harlan Price crossed out, and a third line, Ghost identity equals officer. I stared at that last line until the office felt too small. Late night dispatch came in over the console. Unit 3. Possible break-in 221 Birchwood Lane. Resident reports someone trying door handles after dark. My stomach flipped. Birchwood was only 3 blocks from Jenkins. I grabbed my cruiser keys and the file, then stepped into the night again. The air was still, the moon a thin sliver behind clouds. The station's parking lot smelled faintly of diesel and copier toner. I paused at my cruiser, hand on the door, and let it all sink in. This wasn't random. Someone, something, was mapping both sides of the badge. I drove to Birchwood, lights off, relying on memory to find the house. At the end of the street, a lone lamp cast a pale halo over a white split level. The grass in the yard was trimmed short, the windows dark. I killed the engine 100 feet away and crept forward on foot, footsteps muffled by damp grass. At the front door, I saw fresh scuffs on the threshold. I pressed my palm to the wood. No textured grain, just smooth varnish polished by countless silent attempts. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it across the siding. Muddy heel prints led around the corner, disappearing beneath the shadow of a maple. I circled the house, following the prints to a side entrance. The small window in the door was cracked, just enough for a hand to slip through. I knocked on the doorframe, calling, "Police, Miss Ramirez." "It's Officer Marshall." No answer, so I kicked once, hard, enough to jar the lock. The door swung inward with a soft groan. I stepped in, rifle raised. The hallway beyond smelled of bleach and citrus air freshener. My beam cut through the darkness. Framed family photos. A ceramic pitcher on a hall table. A pair of children's rubber boots lined up neatly by the baseboard. I followed the prints across a worn rug into the kitchen. Cabinets were closed. Table set for one. A mug of cold coffee still near the edge. On the fridge door, magnets held drawings. Stick figure families smiling under suns. One figure wore a police cap. I swallowed hard. Should I cross out the others, leave mine? My own drawing came alive in that moment, the chalk echoing back from my memories. Down the hallway, I heard something. Air moving, like someone breathing behind a closed door. I eased forward and found the guest bedroom at the end. The door was ajar, barely. I nudged it open with my toe. Inside, moonlight spilled through a window onto a dresser. On top, a small whiteboard framed in plastic. Written in messy marker. "Welcome home, Officer." Underneath, names scratched out one by one. Carver, Monroe, Tennyson, Drexel. Next, Ramirez, still legible, and beneath, Marshall? The question mark trembled like it had been scrawled by a shaking hand. My heart slammed against my chest. That question mark was mine, drawn by my own hand, or by someone who knew exactly how I'd feel seeing it. I shone my light on the whiteboard. Beneath the label, Marshall, in chalk on the wooden floorboards, 3 letters. Now. The word lay at an angle, as if shoved into place. Radio static crackled from my belt, a background hiss that grew louder, then faded. I checked my watch, 1:47 a.m., that time again. The same moment on every call. a trap door under the hands of the clock. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a ragged gust. I set my rifle on the bed and sank down, legs trembling. The whiteboard loomed above me, the names of victims scratched off one by one until only mine remained in question. I realized then that the killer, Quinn, Price, that figure in the grain elevator lot, didn't just stalk the vulnerable. He stalked the badge itself, copying patterns, treading the same routes until he could mimic them perfectly. He didn't need to break doors. He just waited for me to let him in, and I had, every time. I slid off the bed and retrieved my rifle, turning back toward the hallway. The lights flickered on, ceiling lamp, night lights, hallway sconces, so fast it made my eyes ache. I dropped to one knee, peering down the corridor. The front door at the other end stood slightly open, moonlight slicing in. Footsteps clicked along the wood, bare, deliberate, unhurried. They stopped just beyond my sight. I called out in a steady voice, "Show yourself." The response was a whisper, so soft I almost missed it. "Good evening, Officer Marshall." The voice was warm, familiar, impossible. My finger tightened on the trigger. A figure emerged from the doorway, not thin like Price, not stout like Quinn. Broad shoulders, straight posture, a cap pulled low, uniform. But the face was a blur, features melting into shadow, as if reality itself refused to define him. He lifted an arm, unfolded his hand, palm facing me. There, perched on his palm, was the Jenkins photo, tattered, wrinkled. He leaned forward, lips brushing the photo's surface. The static crackled again, as if the world held its breath. Then he spoke, voice low. "It ends tonight." He dropped the photo. It fluttered to the floor with my name facing up. Then, before I could fire, he spun and walked down the hall, stepping into a wall of light that consumed him. The hallway stretched empty, silent. I rose, rifle trembling. I picked up the photo, edges singed as if he'd set them alight with cold fire. The chalk beneath my feet had vanished. My radio sputtered, then came alive with dispatch. "Unit 3, status? Respond with..." I cut it off, slid out of the house, and slammed the door behind me. The night was dark again, unblemished by porch light or memory. I sprinted to my cruiser, leaving the photo on the porch. The engine roared to life. As I pulled away, I glanced back once. The house stood quiet, windows dark, not a footprint in sight. The sky was still bruised purple when I finally forced myself out of the station. My legs felt like lead, but the moment I touched asphalt, the weight shifted to my shoulders, as if the night had hung itself across me like a wet blanket. I climbed into my cruiser, the interior smelling of stale coffee and copier dust. The dashboard clock glowed 2:12 a.m., another timestamp from the logs. I killed the engine and let the darkness press in through the windows. In my pocket, the photo of Detective Mills and his daughter rattled against the file cards. I unfolded the latest index card, the one scrawled, "Target list equals all night shift staff plus patrol push-ins." Beneath it, I'd added, "Quinn equals possible false identity." I flipped to the back where I'd scribbled phone numbers for county maintenance, the hospital's HR line, and 2 addresses. One for Lakemont Sanitarium Archive, and the other for the old Thornton farmstead. Both sites had ties to Quinn's supposed cleaning rounds in the police facilities and private homes. If Quinn was a ghost in the paperwork, maybe he was more real in places nobody thought to look. I started the engine and headed first to Thornton farmstead. The drive along a Route 44 was empty. No trucks, no headlights, just my own beam cutting a pale path through the trees. At mile marker 12, I turned onto a dirt drive that plunged into woods. My headlights caught the silhouette of an old barn slated for demolition. I'd been here before on routine code enforcement calls. Tonight it smelled different, like rot and regret. No moonlight reached through the roof's holes, but in the cracks I saw movement, a shape crouched in shadow. I killed the engine and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my boots, and each step sounded like an intrusion. In the beam of my flashlight, the barn's double doors stood partly open. I called, "Police, y'all in there?" Silence. I slipped inside. The air was damp, thick with sawdust and mold. Beams overhead sagged, withered by time. My light flickered over old tractors, rusted tools, and a tattered quilt draped over a workbench. Then I saw it. Muddy footprints leading under the quilt to a small hatch in the floor. The boards around it were fresh. Lighters, smooth cuts, no cobwebs. I pulled up the panel with the tip of my boot. Beneath was a ladder descending into darkness. My spine tingled. I clicked off my light and reached for the handheld. The beam swept down the ladder, 6 rungs coated in grit, then a concrete floor. I climbed down slowly, each rung groaning beneath my weight. At the bottom, the beam illuminated a low-ceiling room. Cinder block walls scrawled with names in chalk: Carver, Monroe, Tennyson, Drexel, Ramirez, crossed out. Then mine, still pristine. Underneath, a date, tonight's date. My breath caught. Against the far wall, 2 metal filing cabinets leaned, one door ajar. I approached, gun drawn. Inside were folders, patient charts, personnel files, home addresses, folders for every victim, every call, and at the bottom, a single photograph. Quinn, in a fluorescent vest, smiling at the camera, labeled Site Supervisor, Cleaning Crew, Precinct 23. The uniform in the photo matched none I'd ever seen. The ID badge was laminated, but the photograph beneath it was cut from a newspaper clipping dated 1987, a decade before this precinct existed. A sound behind me made me spin. At the hatch above, the panel rattled, as if someone was closing it. My radio crackled. "Unit 3, are you there?" "Over." I keyed the mic, voice steady. "At the farmstead, investigating suspicious structure. Might need backup." The voice on the other end paused, then, "Copy that." "ETA 5 minutes." I clicked off. The panel above slid shut with a final thud. Darkness pressed in from the sole opening behind me. The only light was my torch, illuminating the chalk-scrawled wall and the photograph in my hand. I slid the photo into my pocket and backed toward the ladder. My boots kicked up dust that danced in the beam. Behind me, the filing cabinets creaked, as if shifting. I reached the ladder, began my ascent. Halfway up, I heard whispering below, frantic, overlapping voices calling names. "Marshall! Ramirez! Monroe!" The voices rose in panic, then coalesced into a single, low moan. My grip tightened on the rung. Above me, the hatch rattled again. I swung my leg up and hoisted myself out, slamming the panel shut before the ladder collapsed under me. I bolted from the barn into the open air, gulping cold night. The moon had broken through the clouds, casting long shadows of pines across the yard. My radio came to life. "Unit 3, report." I cut it off, raced to my cruiser, jumped in, and locked the doors. The engine roared as I peeled out onto the drive. By the time I reached Lakemont Sanitarium Archive, an old stone building repurposed for record storage, the first hint of dawn was warming the sky. The front doors were secured with a heavy padlock. I broke a window with the butt of my flashlight and climbed through, glass crunching under my gloves. Inside, rows of shelves held cardboard boxes labeled 1950 to 1990. I found Quinn's name scrawled on a narrow box, 1983 to 1987. My heart thudded as I pried the box free and opened it. Inside were archives, payroll ledgers, employee ID cards, training manuals. One card read, Emery Quinn, Cleaners Union, Local 47, 1985. Beneath was a photograph, Quinn's face, smiling at graduation from a custodial program. Age lines matched the man I'd glimpsed in the logs. He was real. He had lived. And then he'd vanished. I scanned the box. No exit records, no termination form, no official notice. It was as if Quinn had walked off the job one night and nobody in the system noticed. A faint noise echoed behind me. Papers shifting on a cart. I spun, gun raised. No one in the aisle. I retraced my steps, returning the box to the shelf. My radio buzzed. Unit 3, dispatch here. Status. I exhaled. Archive cleared, nothing more. Heading back. I clipped the radio off. The corridors felt too quiet, the fluorescent lights too bright, as if shining on secrets nobody wanted revealed. I drove back through empty streets, the rising sun painting the horizon a dull orange. My mind raced with possibilities. Quinn was a ghost in the paperwork, hired, fired, then erased. But why? Who would want to hide his existence? Was it Quinn himself, savvy enough to manipulate records? Or someone higher up masking a larger conspiracy? Each theory felt shakier than the last. By the time I returned to the precinct, the station was stirring. Cars arriving, officers heading to briefings. I slipped inside records, placed Quinn's archive box on the clerk's counter, and wrote on a sticky note. Urgent, Quinn's. Official status, verify chain of custody. I stuck it to her screen. She glanced at it, then at me, and nodded. She knew better than to ask questions before coffee. I walked down the hall to Detective Mills's office. He peeked up as I entered, concern washing his face. You look like hell. I dropped my file on his desk, opened it to the photo of Quinn's ID card. He was real. Worked nights at Lakemont. He vanished. No termination, no clearance, no trail. And he's been cleaning precincts and private homes under the radar for decades. He studied the card. If he's been here before we built this station... He trailed off. I nodded. Exactly. He leaned back. What do we do? I felt the night's chill still clinging to me. We loop in internal affairs. We lock down every file room and records archive. We interview every surviving staff from the 80s to now. We guard Quinn's trail until it leads someplace real. And we watch the clock, because every call, every timestamp, every whispered name has run through that window of 2:23 a.m. for years. I paused. And we find out who's been manipulating it all. He stood, offering a hand. I took it. His grip was firm. Let's finish this. I nodded, feeling something I hadn't felt in nights, purpose. But as I turned toward the door, a soft rapping echoed from the hallway outside his office. Slow, deliberate. My radio, which I'd left clipped to my belt, crackled once. Then I heard it, unmistakable. A whispered voice so close I froze. Marshall. I braced myself, hand on my holster. The world held its breath again. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just hunting a man or a ghost. I was racing the night itself. The tap at the office door came in slow, measured beats. 3 sharp raps that echoed down the corridor like a metronome counting out my remaining time. I swallowed hard, the air thick in my lungs, and exchanged a glance with Detective Mills. His face was drawn, eyes flicking to the handle. I didn't move. The next tap came from inside the room, light but confident, like a knuckle brushing the wood. I stepped forward and cracked the door, weapon drawn. The hallway beyond was empty, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. No silhouette, no shape. Just the faint hum of the station settling into the early morning lull. I clicked off my weapon and stepped back inside, closing the door quietly behind me. "Nobody there," I whispered. Mills frowned. "It's him," I said, voice low. "He's everywhere." We left the office together, eyes scanning every corner. As we reached the lobby, I noticed the front desk clerk standing frozen behind the counter, gaze fixed on the security monitors. I crossed the floor and peered over her shoulder. The camera feed from the lobby showed my reflection, uniform sharp, but behind me in the glass a second figure standing just out of frame. Only the edge of his shoulder and the brim of a cap were visible. I rubbed my eyes. On replay, the figure blinked into existence for a single frame, then vanished. I tore my gaze from the monitor and felt the blood drain from my face. The clerk tapped at her computer, but the feed was cleared. She looked up, confusion etched in her brow. I thought I saw something." I nodded once, too stiff to speak, and hurried past her. Mills followed, close behind. We raced down the hall toward security, but when we got there, the door was locked from the inside. I dropped to one knee, thumbs scanning the lock. No response. I radioed dispatch. "Security room locked, need access." The reply crackled. "Security is offline, access code required." I swore under my breath and looked at Mills. "The code." He nodded, pulled out his phone, and after a moment's hesitation recited the override. I punched it in. The lock clicked. We pushed the door open. Inside, the monitors glowed blue, showing static and frozen frames from 10 different cameras. Parking lot, bullpen, records, security office. All feeds blank except one. The alley behind the station. A hooded figure stood there, facing the camera, equally still. The timestamp, 3:02 a.m. I forced myself to step closer. The figure's cap was pulled low. He held something in his hand. Slowly, he extended his arm. I recognized it before I saw it fully. The Jenkins photo. He stared at the camera for a beat, then turned and walked out of frame. As he passed the vehicle cages, his footsteps were visible, bare, deliberate, then vanished beneath the shadows. Mills and I exchanged a look. "He's taunting us," I said, voice hollow. He shook his head. "Number. He's telling us where to go." I followed the feed as the figure reappeared around the corner, placing the photo on the ground beside a rusted mail trailer. My pulse throbbed. That trailer sat behind the station, long abandoned. Nobody ever went there. We ran from the security room, across the bullpen, through the processing bay and out the side door. The night air hit us like cold steel. Behind us, the station grew quiet again, as if nothing had roused it. We sprinted toward the trailer, headlights from our cruiser painting the yard in harsh white light. The gravel crunched beneath our boots. I reached the trailer first and shone my light on its undercarriage. No sign of the photo. I jumped back. Next to the rusted hitch, rainwater pooled. Half submerged in it, the photo floated face up. I crouched and scooped it out, heart pounding. All the edges were blackened, as if scorched, but the image remained clear. Me, smiling at some community picnic, unaware of what was to come. I turned to Mills. He wants me to remember. He watched the puddle where raindrops rippled across the metal tongue. Or he wants us to break. Watch him? He didn't finish. Somewhere behind us, a door clanged. We spun, weapons drawn, but saw only the station's back entrance. Closed, silent. Rain droplets hung in the beam of my flashlight. The photo slipped from my grasp, fluttered once, and landed face down in the pool. I snatched it back up, flipping to the back. In chalk, barely legible. "Don't forget." I stuffed it into my pocket. Fear knotted in my chest, but beneath it, a brittle resolve took hold. If this ghost wanted me to remember, then I'd uncover every hidden corner of this town until the truth bled out of darkness. I looked at Mills. He's not done. He nodded, frowning. Then neither are we. We returned to the precinct and barricaded the station doors. Cameras were manually reset. Dispatch was rerouted. Calls for backup were sent to county and state lines. Every officer on duty that night was briefed. No one goes alone. Every call must be logged. No unexplained entries, no turned backs. We filled every station room with printed logs, maps, personnel files, and whiteboards scrawled with addresses, names, timestamps. The station looked like a war room, defenders entrenched against a faceless enemy. By 4:45 a.m., the count was in. 15 homes hit in the last 6 months, dozens of false alarms, hundreds of hang-ups. Every site and every affected officer had chalk marks, scrawls, footprints, photos, or phone recordings. Some victims remembered voices. Some didn't survive to tell the tale. Names were burned into my mind: Carver, Monroe, Tennyson, Drexel, Ramirez, and mine, underlined, encircled, questioned. At 5 a.m., off-duty officers and detectives arrived. I briefed them in the briefing room, voice steady despite the exhaustion staining my bones. I projected the map. Red pins for confirmed locations, yellow for suspicious. I traced a line through them which made no sense. No single route, no pattern of escalation. The ghost moved like water, filling gaps, ebbing from one corner of this county to another, aware of every detour and every patrol log. He was omnipresent. A young detective named Vargas raised her hand. "Sir, do we have any leads on motive? Why the names? Why the photos?" I tapped the map. "It's about memory, ownership. He wants us to know he knows every move we make, every time we answer the call, and that he can erase us as easily as black chalk on a white wall. Each house, each case, is an imprint of us." Vargas's eyes were wide, like he's marking territory. I nodded. "Or auditing us." The room fell silent. The only sound was the clicking of marker tips and the hum of projectors. No one spoke. Finally, Vargas whispered, "What about the last one?" I looked at the map. The final red pin hovered over the abandoned grain elevator on County Road 12. The place where it all began, where I'd first heard the breath on my radio, where Harlan Price's cap lay on the floor. I swallowed. "Tomorrow night I'm going back there." Vargas hesitated. "Sir, it's suicide." I met her gaze. "If I don't go, he wins. He'll keep moving. Closer, faster, quieter, until no one answers the call." She nodded once, shoulders squared. "Then let's make sure you don't go alone." The room erupted in action. Radios keyed, vehicles checked, weapons loaded. By sunset, a team of 12 officers, detectives, K-9 units, and a SWAT detachment would fan out across the elevator grounds. Every inch would be searched, recorded, tagged. We'd bring thermal imaging, motion sensors, drones, everything human ingenuity could muster. I watched them prepare and felt a quiet dread. It was foolish, like using a flashlight in a storm, but I had to try. The chalk marks, the photos, the footprints, they weren't random. They were part of a message stretched across nights and cases, an accusation that nobody had the right to forget. And I was the final blot. Still standing at the edge of the map, name circled in question. As I gathered my gear, I noticed my reflection in the window. The man staring back wore exhaustion like armor. His eyes were rimmed red, his jaw set like flint. I touched the glass, half expecting a handprint to appear beside mine. Instead, the window held only my reflection, and beyond it, the empty street. I slid my flashlight and radio belt on, tightened my jacket. Outside, the sky was bruised again, crawling toward midnight. My partner and the team assembled, their faces determined, tense. I turned to them. We're all here because we answer calls most people can't handle. Tonight, we make the call they'll never forget. A hush fell. Then, one by one, they checked their gear and moved out. I paused at the door, hand on the frame, and looked back at the empty station behind me. It felt like leaving a child in a battlefield. I swallowed and stepped out into the night. The wind was rising, carrying the scent of rain and earth. The grain elevator loomed ahead, a skeletal silhouette against brooding clouds. No lights, no signs of life, just darkness waiting. I raised my flashlight and radio, took a steadying breath, and crossed the threshold into history. Behind me, the station doors clicked shut. The radios went silent. The night stalked us all, and somewhere in the shadows he watched. The convoy moved in silence toward the old grain elevator, headlights cutting narrow beams through gathering fog. My cruiser led the way, followed by 5 patrol cars in staggered formation. Behind us, K-9 units and SWAT vans flanked either side, their spotlights swinging methodically across cornfields and low brush. The clouds overhead churned dark, as if they knew what was coming. I kept my radio muted, listening instead to the crunch of gravel under tires and the distant call of a night bird. When we reached the elevator's clearing, the team spread out into 2 search groups. I took point with Detective Mills, our flashlights dancing along the silo's rusted exterior. Every bolt, every seam felt alive with possibility. We swept the perimeter, scanning for footprints or evidence of recent activity. The concrete pads that once held grain bins now lay broken and overgrown, shadows in the damp air. Our first hit came at the West Foundation. Fresh prints in the mud, heel to toe, leading to a narrow hatch half buried in brambles. I crouched, tracing the prints to the metal lip. They matched the Elmwood footprints, bare, human, unbroken. I lifted the hatch, it groaned on rusted hinges. Detective Mills covered my 6 as I lowered myself down a ladder into a cavernous pit beneath the elevator. The chamber was narrow, bare earth walls, a low ceiling that forced me to hunch. My light picked out warped wooden beams, tangled roots, and, far in the corner, 3 upright metal drums, their lids sealed. The air smelled of oil and mold. I heard movement behind me, heave of breath, a soft scrape. I spun, weapon raised, but saw only the echo of my own steps. Mills climbed down behind me. "Marshall," he whispered. His beam settled on the drums. Each bore white stenciled letters: D-R-Y, W-E-T, and U-N-K. The final drum was labeled U-N-K, unknown. My heart thudded. Wunk matched no code I recognized. I signaled the K-9 unit above to send down the dog. The animal's paws slapped the wood ladder before it nosed around the floor. It stopped at the UNK drum, sniffed at its seam, and then began to circle it in tight revolutions. The dog's hackles rose. I pried the lid with a screwdriver from my belt. The drum's contents spilled toward us in a thin tide of faded photographs, muddy and wet. I caught one before it dissolved entirely, a grainy black and white image of a uniformed officer standing before this grain elevator, face indistinct, but posture identical to mine when I've posed for shift change photos. I let the rest drop back into the drum. My stomach clenched. Footsteps clattered above. I glanced up through the hatch. Heads leaning over, flashlights peering in. Then the hatch slammed shut. Darkness swallowed the chamber. I radioed for Mills, but static choked my message. The K-9 bay above me barked once in panic, then silence. I clicked on my handheld light and moved away from the barrels. My beam swept the walls and floor. More prints, bare, fading, led into a recess I hadn't noticed before. A narrow crawl space under the silo's curved shell. The prince angled into it and vanished. I signaled Mills. He relit his light and we edged forward, squeezing under the curved wall. The passage was short, maybe 10 feet, before opening into a small, box-like room. My beam landed on another whiteboard propped against the far wall. On it, names were scrawled: Carver, Monroe, Tennyson, Drexel, Ramirez, each crossed off. Then my name in thick letters, untouched. Underneath one word, cleansed. Beneath that, a question. Are you next? The lettering dripped downward, as if written in fresh chalk that ran like wet paint. My breath froze. I reached for my radio again, nothing. I fiddled with the button, only dead air. Behind me, a soft click. I spun. The passage behind me had collapsed. No crawl space, no exit. Just compacted earth and tangled roots. I raised my weapon, backing toward the whiteboard. The dog whined behind me, pressed low against Mills's leg. The second drum, labeled W-E-T, lay in the center of the room. Its lid was off. Inside, a pool of dark liquid rippled in the flashlight beams. I swallowed. We're trapped, I whispered. Mills pressed his back against mine. We move forward, he said, voice calm. I nodded. He slung his duty belt to the floor and clambered onto the drum, flattening his shoulder to the whiteboard. The frame creaked. Then, slowly, the board swung forward on its hinges, revealing a narrow shaft behind it. I ducked through just as the floor beneath the drum gave way with a crack, sending the drum careening into the liquid below with a splash. We dropped into a narrow pit of cold water that swirled around our knees. My light flickered with static as I fumbled to keep it above the murky liquid. The passage ended in an iron grate set into the wall. Behind it, I heard voices. Low murmurs, too faint to distinguish. I pried at the grate with my knife. Skinned knuckles, muddy sleeves, but it held fast. The voices grew louder, become whispers that circled me. Are you next? Are you next? My pulse hammered. Mills found a gap along the grate's edge, just enough to slip my hand through. My fingers probed behind. I came away with a small key, cold metal. I slid it into the lock and twisted. The grate clanged inward, dropping us into total darkness beyond. Instinctively, I triggered a red lens on my flashlight, bathing the space in low, reactive glow. The red light revealed walls coated in chalk, names and dates, dozens of them, some half erased by time. Ellen MacArthur, Joseph Kim, Martha Coffey, all victims from neighboring counties. Names that never made the news. We stepped through the grate into a tunnel of roughly hewn stone. The air was stale, damp. My boots splashed in shallow water that pooled along the floor. Ahead, at the tunnel's end, a small opening led back into the earth. As we emerged, I found myself behind the grain elevator's main silo, facing fields I recognized but from unfamiliar angles, like walking in a dream you can't place. My light's red glow fell upon a solitary figure sitting on a concrete block, back to us, head bowed. I stepped forward, heart in my throat. Show yourself. My voice echoed across the clearing. The figure didn't stir. Mills moved to flank. When I got within 10 feet, the figure turned slowly. The abrupt motion sent a shock through me. It was me. My uniform identical, my posture the same, my cap pulled low over eyes I never wanted to see. I froze. The double of me lifted one hand and pointed toward the silo. Then it reached into its pocket and withdrew a faded envelope, stained with mud. It turned it around, my name scrawled on the front in chalk, the handwriting jagged. It opened the flap and withdrew a slip of paper. The double raised the paper in front of my face. On it, one line, I remember everything. I told myself to raise my weapon, to demand answers. But my muscles wouldn't obey. The double folded the paper back into the envelope, stood, and took a slow step toward me. The fog curled around its boots like living smoke. I watched the space between us shrink. A distant rumble of thunder vibrated under my feet. My double's face was blank, features obscured by shadow, but I saw my own eyes reflected, hollow, accusatory. Then the double tilted its head. The tip of its eyebrow lifted in a gesture so subtle I almost missed it. In the red glow, I saw chalk dust clinging to its sleeve. It turned and walked away, without a glance, toward the far edge of the silo. Each footstep echoed in the empty night. I followed it, transfixed. As I reached the corner, I found only footprints, mine, leading into the open field, then stopping abruptly at the tree line. No trail beyond, no sound except wind through stalks of corn. I knelt and pressed a palm into the earth. The soil was damp and cool. Something glittered beneath my finger, a shard of chalk stained with dirt. I recognized the color, the same white chalk used on every whiteboard, every wall, every photo back. I tucked it into my pocket. Behind me, the double's voice drifted on the wind. I remember everything. And then nothing. The fog swallowed the figure, and with a rolling whoosh, the night seemed to exhale. Thunder cracked overhead. I looked at the silo's steel ribs reaching into the darkness. "Are you next?" I whispered to the empty field. No answer. The only movement was a single cornstalk, bending in a sudden gust. I stood, unsteady, listening to my own breathing. The team's radios crackled with movement, voices calling out, flashlights sweeping the elevator's upper levels. I keyed my mic. "This is Marshall. I found the entity, its human form. It disappeared." My voice trembled. Dispatch answered with confusion. "Are you okay, Unit 3? I closed my eyes, letting the night settle around me. "I'm not sure." I turned, wiping rain from my face. The loader's beam swung across the silo's side. You could almost mistake its gap for an entrance. I took a step, then another. Behind me, Mills called, "Marshall, you coming?" I took a deep breath and replied, voice steady now, "Yes." 2 steps later, I paused and looked back at the empty field. Moonlight caught the top of a wooden post, weathered, worn. On it, barely visible in chalk, "Remember me." I stared until the post seemed to pulse with light. My blood ran cold. I stepped forward, leaving the chalk shard behind in the dirt. I climbed the rickety metal ladder bolted to the silo's side, clouds of mist swirling around each rung. My flashlight beam cut through the haze, illuminating rusted rivets and peeling paint. Above, a small platform jutted out under the curved roof, where I'd first heard the whisper of static, moments before everything changed. My hands were slick with sweat despite the chill. Each breath felt ragged, as if the air itself carried unseen weight. At the top, the wind gusted so fiercely I had to brace myself against the guardrail. Below, the team's spotlights probed the field in shifting arcs, but here, on the platform, it was just me and the night. I set my flashlight on the metal floor and scanned the horizon. Moonlight filtered through the clouds in ghostly beams, painting the cornfields in silver. The grain elevator loomed above like a sentinel, its cylindrical body a monolith carved by shadows. My radio crackled softly at my belt. Detective Mills calling, checking in. I keyed the mic, but only let my response fade into static. Up here, every word felt like noise. I shut off the radio and listened. The distant hum of engines, the staccato drip of condensation from the elevator roof, the soft rustle of leaves at the edge of the clearing, and then, unmistakable, a breath, not mine, behind me. I didn't turn. Instead, I slipped my hand inside my jacket and touched the chalk shard I'd pocketed in the field. Its edges were worn, and I felt the grit of mud still clinging to it. I held it between thumb and forefinger, fingertips tingling at the memory of every name it had carved. Carver, Monroe, Tennyson, Drexel, Ramirez, and me, Marshall. The shard felt impossibly heavy, as if it were anchored to every unsolved call, every unanswered whisper. Why? The word escaped me in a harsh whisper. The wind stole it almost immediately, carrying it across miles of farmland. I slipped the shard into a pocket and turned slowly. The platform was empty, no double, no figure, no sign of motion. Only the constant breath of the night pressing against my uniform. My knees sagged, and I knelt by the flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut across the platform floor, revealing grooves I hadn't seen earlier, narrow lines gouged into the metal, like claws or siren call. When I ran my fingertip along the deepest groove, it bled an echo of static through my mind. Half memory, half hallucination. My heart hammered. Every cut felt deliberate, as if someone had carved an invitation. I rose and moved to the guardrail, peering over into the darkness. The field below was still, silent, but I sensed movement. Something gliding through the rows of corn just out of sight. I swept my light across the stalks, revealing nothing but swaying leaves. Then, at the edge of the beam, the corn parted, and a single tall figure emerged. Barefoot, uniform dark, cap low. I froze. The figure stood just beyond where the light reached, face entirely hidden. "Are you the man behind the calls?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer. The figure lifted a hand in a slow, deliberate gesture, palm up. In the palm lay something glowing faintly. Another photograph. It hovered over the field like a lantern in the dark. Then, as if on command, the figure turned and moved back into the corn, melting between the rows until only rustling remained. I stared at where he'd been, mind spinning. The photograph drifted down, carried by a sudden gust. I caught it. A black and white image of a child's bicycle lying in the mud. No rider in sight. On the back, scrawled in familiar chalk, "Beginnings." My stomach clenched. The first call I ever answered. An abandoned kid's trike on Maple Street with no child in sight. I remembered the unease back then, brushing it off as a stray toy. I'd never filed it as anything more. I tucked the photo into the pocket, holding the shard, breath caught in my throat. The photograph and shard pressed together like a key and lock, symbols of every overlooked moment, every case dismissed. I realized with a sinking clarity that this entity had been here long before Harlan Price, long before Quinn. He'd been here since the first unanswered ring, the first door that swung open for no one. He was woven into the fabric of every call. Below, I heard footsteps, Mills's voice, urgent. "Marshall, status." I clicked on the radio. "I found something." I explained the photograph and shard. He called back, but the words sounded distant. I slipped the bracelet of my wristwatch free and laid it on the guardrail beside the shard and photo. Shiny steel against rust and chalk dust. It was the one I'd worn when I joined the force. It bore my badge number. Now, it felt like a chapter I needed to close. I pressed a knee against the rail and let the shard, photo, and watch fall over the edge. They arced through the air, mingling in a blurred swirl before disappearing into the cornfield with muffled thuds. A single wave of the flashlight confirmed they were gone. I stood tall, shoulders squared, hands empty. The night seemed to settle, sighing as if in relief. I keyed the mic. "All units, stand down. I've got it." Below, officers hesitated, Then engines idled back to quiet. Mills climbed a ladder. His face was grave. We stood together on the platform, wind swirling around us. I reached out to grip the guardrail but found only cool metal. No chalk grooves, no scratches, nothing left but our reflections on the silvery clouds. I closed my eyes. In the silence, I heard a faint whisper, so soft I almost thought it was my own breath. "Thank you." I opened my eyes. The platform was still empty. No sign of the figure, no further evidence. Just night, vast and unyielding. I clipped my radio back to my belt. "Let's go home," I said. Mills nodded. As we descended, the first light of dawn crept along the horizon, bleeding pink into the sky. The grain elevator receded behind us, monolithic and silent. I felt different, unburdened, yet tethered to something eternal. Back in the station, every log, every file, every echo of static felt lighter, like the final thread had been cut. Yet, when I passed records, I paused at the archive shelves, a cold prickle crawling up my spine. The chalk shard, the photo, my watch, they were gone. But were they? Late that night, in my own house, I placed fresh coffee on the table and glanced at the mantel. There, perched beside my father's old service revolver, sat a small shard of chalk dust, white against oak. I rubbed my finger across it. It smudged, just enough to leave a single letter. M. I stared at it, breath catching. The night had released me, but it had not forgotten, and neither could I. I didn't sleep. The shard of chalk dust on my mantel seemed to glow in the half-light of dawn, a silent accusation that brushed at my thoughts. I stared at it until the sun fully rose, then showered and dressed without looking away. Every reflection in the mirror felt wrong. My uniform pressed taut against a body that seemed borrowed, my own face a mask I'd outgrown. At the precinct, things moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Dispatch called out routine. Abandoned cars, false alarms, a stray cat locked in a barn. But I heard only the hum of static wherever there were radios. In the locker room, I unpacked my gear and found the chalk dust under my collar, smudged onto my shirt. I brushed it off and rolled my shoulders, trying to shake the heaviness in my chest. Detective Mills met me by the coffee machine. He looked as exhausted as I felt. He slid me a mug, black, no sugar. I traced the rim with my thumb. "Did you find anything else?" He shook his head. "After you cleared the elevator, every search team came back empty. No new evidence. Security footage from the field cameras showed dozens of officers moving about, yours truly among them, but no sign of anything unnatural." I stared into my coffee. "And the chalk shard? The photo? My watch?" He sighed. "Never recovered. Everything you dropped just gone. No one else saw you hold them. No one heard that whisper." He tapped his temple. "You feeling all right?" I forced a nod. "Just tired." The morning briefing was a blur of charts and logs. I watched each officer's face as they reported. No one betrayed a tremor of the fear I felt. They were proud, relieved that we'd finally shut this down. I didn't correct them. Instead, I made a point of asking about every site again, following up on every thread. Each lead stalled at Quinn's file. No record beyond that box in Lakemont, and at Harlan Price, whose name persisted in old hospital rosters but never in arrest logs. It was as if the system insisted on folding him back into oblivion. After the briefing, I spent hours in records, cross-referencing the precinct's call logs against hospital admission dates and maintenance rosters. I found clusters of calls around midnight to 2 a.m., every one of them logged as unfound, hang-up, or caller disconnected. I traced each address on a map, highways, back roads, farmsteads, subdivisions. until the pins formed an all but invisible spiral centered on Dryden Regional Medical Center. It matched the pattern of phone calls, a spiral expanding outward, ring after ring after ring. By afternoon, a headache pulsed behind my eyes. I closed the file on Quinn and leaned back, letting my chair creak under my weight. The shard on my mantel had a counterpart here, in a cardboard box on the lowest shelf, in the records of a forgotten staffer who'd served in 1978. Name, position, shift patterns. I pulled the file. Veronica Hale, housekeeper. The notation, cleared of all duties, employment terminated, no forwarding address. Underneath, a tiny smudge of chalk, a single dot like the tip of a question mark. My pulse flickered. The real Quinn had vanished long before Dr. Price, back in the late 80s. But this Hale woman, her file stopped in 1981. No death certificate, no transfer paperwork, nothing. Not even a scrap of a Social Security audit. It was as if she'd walked into the record room one shift and disappeared through the walls. I printed the file and slipped it into my jacket. When I looked around, the room was empty. I paused, scanning the stacks of cabinets. Did I imagine a flicker of movement? A shape at the end of the aisle, slipping behind a row of boxes? I told myself it was my reflection, stretched by the flickering fluorescent lights. Late afternoon light fell through the windows, bleaching the edges of every paper on my desk. I packed up the Hale file and walked to Internal Affairs, keying the door code with trembling fingers. The investigator on duty raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" I placed the file down. "She's part of it. I've got to know what happened." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but be careful, Marshal. Once you pry into this, records can vanish faster than chalk in the rain." I left the office with that warning ringing in my ears. Every step down the hallway felt like walking through memory, the air heavy with the echo of static. I reached my cruiser, slid behind the wheel, and sat with the engine off, the Hale file open on my lap. Each page told half a story: routine duties, shift changes, commendations for punctuality, then abrupt blank lines. At the end, typed in red ink, "Separation, unknown circumstances, file closed." I closed the folder and exhaled. If Quinn was a ghost in the paperwork, Hale was the whisper that had first called me. Night descended before I knew it. I drove out to the old sanitarium archives at Lakemont, this time officially, with a warrant and backup. The building loomed under moonlight, a hulking fortress of stone and steel. Inside, I walked the aisles with a backup detective and a pair of forensic techs. They collected every Hale mention, every smudge, every grain of chalk on old boxes. I watched them work under the harsh glare of portable lamps, dust motes dancing in the beams. Every so often, I glanced over at the stack of files, Hale, Quinn, Price, lined up like sentinels. When we loaded the boxes into evidence vans, a tech called out, "Sir, you might want to see this." He held up a small envelope, yellowed and brittle. On the front typed, "Personnel Reward Form." Inside was a single Polaroid of a woman in uniform, Veronica Hale, standing in front of the sanitarium, chin lifted, smiling. On the back, written in familiar chalk, "I remember you." A chill wound around my spine. I recognized the floor numbers scrawled faintly beneath the words. Floors I'd patrolled in another precinct, in another state, during a long-forgotten detail early in my career. I'd never seen Hale's face before, but I felt her gaze through the photo. The kudos form was dated January 1979, just before the record trail went cold. I dropped the Polaroid into an evidence bag and sealed it. "Chain of custody," I whispered. Outside, the night air was brittle, tasting of ozone and earth. I slipped into the passenger seat of my cruiser as the team piled in, and we drove back toward town. The streets were empty, lights low, but every stoplight felt like a crossroads. At home again, the shard and the photograph had left new marks on my desk, chalk dust that hadn't been there before. I cleaned the surface, but the dust reappeared, tiny flecks that clung stubbornly to the grain of the wood. Eventually, I left the desk in disarray and climbed into bed, barely registering the sheets grazing my skin. I fell into an uneasy sleep, dreams flitting between hospital corridors, abandoned cars, and the echo of my own voice repeating, "Are you next?" I woke before dawn, soaked in sweat. My phone lay on the nightstand, screen cracked, but a single message glowed, 3:14 a.m. I stared at it. No sender, no body, just the time. My stomach convulsed. That was the moment I first heard the hang-up call at Elmwood. I touched the screen, thumb trembling. The message didn't fade. Instead, it shifted. 2:47 a.m., then 12:03 a.m., then now. I sat up, heart hammering. The clock on my wall read 5:17 a.m. A new message arrived. I remember everything. My breath caught. I reached for my service revolver under the pillow but stopped when I saw my reflection in the window. Eyes wide, face pale, uniform glinting in the dawn light. The chalk dust was sprinkled across the floor, tracing a path from the desk to the window, as if someone had walked across my room, leaving question marks in their wake. I turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, the street was empty, silent. No footprints, no shadow. Yet, on the windowsill, in fine white chalk, were 3 words. "Did you forget?" The chalk letters on my windowsill pulsed in the dawn light, each stroke so fine I almost thought they were an illusion. I pressed my palm against the glass, cool, hard, feeling the chalk dust smear beneath my fingers. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide and hollow. Below the 3 words, a single dot, like the fulcrum of a question mark, trembled in the morning breeze. I backed away, breathing ragged. My revolver lay on the nightstand, half hidden beneath the wrinkled sheets. I considered grabbing it, but something held me back. An instinct that this last encounter wasn't about firepower. It was about memory. Suiting up in the bathroom mirror, I splashed cold water on my face. I studied the chalk smudges on my uniform, a trail leading from my desk to the window. My heart slammed in my chest. Every case, every hang-up, every silent door, they were all threads woven through the tapestry of my career, and someone, something, had been unweaving them beneath my feet. I left my house without locking the door, the chalk words still scrawled behind me, and walked to my cruiser. The streets were empty, silent as graves. My radio remained off. I didn't want anyone's voice telling me what to do. This last step I had to take alone. I drove to the one place that held every echo of my past, the dry creek bed behind Elmwood Drive where I'd spent my first patrol hours as a rookie, stumbling through waist-high grass and whispering static into my mic. My cruiser's headlights sliced through the final veil of night. I parked at the edge of the creek, leaving the engine running as a distant promise. I stepped onto the cracked concrete spillway, boots crunching on gravel. The chalk shard I'd once held weighed heavy in my pocket. The shard and photos were gone, but my memory was vivid. I closed my eyes and listened. Wind through the reeds, the soft drip of groundwater, and, beneath it all, the whisper of static. It seeped into my bones, curling around my spine like smoke. At the center of the creek bed, where the water pooled in a shallow basin, I knelt and placed my palm on the damp earth. The ground held a coolness that stung through my glove. I thought of every victim whose name I'd read, Carver, Monroe, Tennyson, Drexel, Ramirez, Hale, Quinn, Price. Each had been summoned by a whisper, beckoned through darkness. I touched the earth and felt the past ripple beneath me. A soft glow appeared at the edges of the basin, like moonlight refracted through water. I leaned closer. Floating on the surface were dozens of tiny chalk fragments, drifting on the current. They coalesced into shapes, letters, names, before dissolving again. My breath caught. The fragments spelled out one word over and over as they circled the basin: Marshall. I closed my fist around the cold earth, crushing the fragments, feeling the grit crumble beneath my glove. "I remember," I whispered. "I remember you." The whisper in my ear answered, unmistakable amid the creek's gentle sough. "You remember everything." The voice was soft and hollow, as if carried on the same current that stirred the chalk pieces. I froze, heart thundering. The water at my fingertips rippled, and a single smooth stone rose to the surface, flat, round, chalk white. It hovered, then dropped into my hand. I held it up, recognizing the grooves carved into its face. Each groove a name I'd read, a case I'd logged. But at the center was a new carving. My badge number, etched deep and blackened. I tucked the stone into my coat pocket and stood, turning slowly. Behind me, the creek bed stretched empty, but in the distance, the grain elevator's silhouette stood against the awakening sky, silent and watchful. I took a step forward, and then two, until I felt the pressure of air shift. Behind me, a whisper, "Don't forget." I didn't turn. Instead, I reached into my pocket and crushed the stone, chalk dust sprinkling into the water. It clouded the pool, swirling into currents that glinted like starlight. I pressed my heels into the gravel and took a steadying breath, letting the static whisper wash over me. I walked back to my cruiser without looking back, each step a promise. When I slid into the driver's seat, the dashboard clock read exactly midnight. I exhaled slowly and placed my hand over my heart, feeling it settle into a steady beat. I started the engine, lights fading as I pulled away. The creek bed receded in my mirror until it was just another shadow at the edge of town. But as I drove toward the rising sun, I felt it there, an echo at the back of my mind, the lingering pulse of unanswered calls and unsolved faces. A final breath of static that said, "I remember you." And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that some memories never fade, and some nightmares never truly end. I killed my headlights the moment I cleared the tree line, letting the wet darkness swallow the cruiser whole. Rain plastered my uniform to my back so that every shift of my gear felt like a second skin. I didn't bother with the wipers. The droplets bouncing off the windshield sounded more like fingernails scraping metal than weather. Some people say storms clear the air, but all I could smell was damp rubber and old vinyl seats. My eyes darted to the dash cam light, but it wasn't blinking. No recording, no backup of what I was about to find. Dispatch had sent me to this stretch of County Road 17 because of a loose dog. An elderly caller had reported a collie wandering along her driveway 2 nights in a row, howling into the wind. I figured I'd pull over, check the fence line, maybe shoo the dog back toward the yard. Instead, I pulled up next to a rusted Chevy pickup with its hazards on, engine idling so low it sounded like a heartbeat you could almost miss. The driver's door hung open. Footprints led away from the truck. Heavy, military-style treads stepping off the gravel shoulder into rock-hard dirt. Then they vanished a dozen feet later, right where the cornstalks began. My radio stayed silent when I reached for it, static at best, a broken promise of contact. I keyed the mic. 11 Alpha, do you copy? Nothing. I clicked again, nothing. Then I saw the broken tail light, glass missing, shards on the ground like spilled mercury. I stepped onto the gravel, boots crunching in rhythm with my heartbeat. I checked my 6, the taillight clicking off in the dark. Fumbling for my flashlight, I strapped my duty belt tight. The beam cut a narrow path. Inside the truck, the seats were damp, soaked through by the storm. The bench was torn at the seam. Whoever sat there left in a hurry. I called it in, quietly, so the hiss of rain over the mic wouldn't ruin my transmission. Dispatch, this is Car 11 Alpha. I've got an abandoned pickup, hazards on, door ajar, driver missing. Request backup and K9. I swallowed hard, letting the words tumble out without shaking. Location, County Road 17, milepost 2. Repeat, milepost 2. No response. Nothing but the rain. I patted my flashlight like I'd stashed it under my arm all shift, though I'd already pulled it free. Anxiety flared. Protocol pressed on my chest like a fist. The footprints caught my eye again. 2 rows, heavy enough to indent the dirt, turning east toward the field. I leaned over, examining them. Heel prints about 10 inches apart, wide toe prints, adult size, no drag marks, no limp. Whoever walked this path did so normally. For a moment I felt relief. If the person simply left the truck behind, maybe they were okay. Then my beam flickered. I jerked it, heart at my throat. It blinked, died, then sputtered back to life, weak as a candle. I cursed under my breath. New flashlights weren't cheap, and I'd begged for an upgrade last quarter. No dice. I stepped off the gravel and into the field, boots sinking slightly in the wet earth. Each step carried the soft pop of soggy soil, echoing in the night. My beam traversed the stalks, tall, damp, rustling as I passed. I could hear the wind shift, whispering down the rows like a crowd leaning in to hear a secret. I followed the prints to the edge where the corn thinned, where a wire fence sagged under moss and old barbs. The footprints stopped. My breathing hitched. I checked my watch. 12:13 a.m. Another hour until shift change. No partner, no backup, just me in the dark. I shone the light across the field margin. Nothing but wet fence posts and the rain-slicked wire. Yet I felt watched. I paused, listening. The radio's still dead. No thunder, no crickets, only the steady drum of rain. I called out, voice low. "This is Officer Mallory. If you're out here, show yourself." My words sounded hollow even to me. No answer. I clicked off the mic and pressed my shoulder against the fence, shining my flashlight into the trees beyond. That's when I saw it. A figure at the edge of the tree line, half covered by shadow, half by rain. I froze, fingers tightening on the fence wire. For a breath, I thought it was someone seeking help, until the shape ducked back behind an oak, so deliberate it felt choreographed. I leaned forward, trying to force my eyes through the curtain of rain, but I saw nothing when I blinked. No movement, no footprints leading from the trees to here. The prints still stopped at the fence. My heart pounded like a war drum. I trained my beam on the tree trunks, each one wide and dark and unmoving, only the rain and the empty field. I backed away, stumbling over a mound of earth. My flashlight beam went wild, sweeping across the field, then the truck. Its cab was empty, no sign of life. I lifted my radio mic, voice shaking. "Dispatch, I have visual on..." "Never mind, no visual, send someone." Silence. I thumbed my radio again, static tremors. No help. I glanced at the fence line one more time, shivering as thunder rolled somewhere far off. When I looked back at the truck, my beam caught something in the bed, a worn duffel bag, canvas frayed, strap torn. I walked around to the tailgate, heart in my throat. The duffel lay open, soaked through, empty, like someone had grabbed everything inside and left in a hurry. Not stolen, removed. I squatted to inspect. The corners of the bag showed fresh scuff marks, as though dragged through the mud. But no other prints. Nothing inside but rainwater pooling where belongings should have been. My pulse raced. I should have called this in, should have stepped back, but something pulled me closer. A need to understand, to piece together the disappearing act of footprints, the glitching radio, the abandoned bag. I reached in, and my fingers brushed something in the seam. I pulled out a single silver cufflink, blood-smudged, the initial H barely visible through the grime. I froze, cufflink in hand, rain washing over my face. The name didn't mean anything to me, no local H names registered, but my mind reeled. Whose cufflink? Where was the owner? Why leave a duffel bag and one cufflink but nothing else? The answer hovered in the cold air, unreachable. Thunder rumbled closer, and I felt the first stab of real fear. Something wasn't right here. Protocol evaporated. Training faded. Only the instinct that I was too deep, that backing out now might be impossible. A sudden crack split the night. Wood snapping. Heavy boot on branch. I spun, light swinging, heart hammering in my ears. I saw the silhouette again, just beyond the fence, half visible through the downpour. It didn't move this time. It stood, unmoving, watching me. Then the radio came alive with static, so loud I nearly dropped the cufflink. I keyed the mic. "Dispatch, do you copy?" A hiss, then nothing. The figure vanished. The woods fell silent except for the rain. I stood in the field, rain soaking me, life in the cufflink still clutched. My breath echoed in my ears. Behind me, the truck idled its low heartbeat. Ahead, empty corn stalks and ghostly black trees. I slipped the cufflink into my pocket without thinking, turned, and walked back toward the gravel shoulder. My flashlight failed 3 more times before I reached the truck, each flicker a reminder that nothing here could be trusted. I slid inside, door thudding shut, and the engine cut. Darkness swallowed me as I sat frozen, mind racing through the unanswered questions. Who left the duffel? Who was watching? And why did the radio and maybe everything want me gone before I learned the truth? I sat there for what felt like hours, the cufflink's weight pressing into my thigh pocket. Rain drummed its relentless rhythm on the rooftop, a cruel metronome reminding me that time didn't stop for fear. I could have driven back to the station, called it in with full detail, filed a report, gotten backup. But I felt rooted, as if the truck's empty lights had marked a boundary I couldn't cross without solving its mystery. Finally, I killed the engine, the cabin falling into absolute silence aside from the storm's hiss. I climbed out again, boots slapping wet gravel, flashlight in hand despite its betrayal. I circled the truck once more, every muscle taut, expecting footprints to reappear, expecting that figure in the trees to step from shadow into light. Nothing. The duffel lay on the tailgate, waterlogged and inconclusive. I knelt, testing the mud for prints I might have missed. The ground was churned where I'd stood, but beyond that, no clear tracks. Like someone had scraped the earth smooth. Only the faint disruption of blades of grass where the footprints had been. My heart beat so hard I could almost hear it over the rain. I reached down, gripped the edge of the duffel, and peeled it free from the tailgate. Inside, I found a single black leather glove, right hand only, its fingers stiff with congealed mud. No matching left glove. I slid it into my belt, face stinging as the rain hit and stood. The silence was suffocating. I shone the light into the cornfield again, sweeping back and forth, my breath shallow. The only movement was rain and rustling stalks. Something nudged my memory, a detail I'd passed over. When I'd radioed dispatch, I hadn't heard my own voice on the speaker. No crackle, no faint echo. The mic had been dead even as I spoke. Here, on the road shoulder, my radio seemed alive only when it wanted to be and dead when I needed it most. That inconsistency gnawed at me. Radios don't choose when to listen. I returned to the driver's side door and opened it. The cab smelled of rain and vinyl. I pressed my cheek to the steering wheel, searching for something I couldn't name. My uniform was soaked, my hands trembling. I reached into my pocket and felt the cufflink, cold and unyielding. I pulled it free, stared at the blood smear across its polished surface. Whose blood? Whose cufflink? It didn't belong to any local preacher, businessman, or farmer I recognized. It was deliberately inconspicuous. A small silver H, understated. Someone who cared about appearance enough to wear cufflinks, but messy enough to lose one in the mud. I slammed the door shut, the click snapping me back. I walked around the hood, rain blurring the patrol lights behind me. I considered walking down the road toward town, but the storm was dense, the road winding, and the cornfields closed in tight. I'd never find my way without headlights. My cell phone, if I had reception, might have helped, but I hadn't checked. I'd lived out here my whole career. I knew cell black spots better than dispatch computers did. This stretch of road was notorious, a dead zone for phones, radios, and common sense alike. I raised my flashlight to scan the horizon. Lightning cracked in the distance, illuminating the field for a split second. A vast sea of stalks rippling under wind. In that flash, I saw what looked like movement atop the horizon, a low shape perched on the road sign, like a dark bird the size of a person. I blinked, and it was gone. My stomach churned. The logical part of me said it was a trick of light, the brain filling blanks in the storm. The other part knew I'd seen the silhouette, broad shoulders, still as stone, only 2 seconds earlier. Hands already on my belt radio, I barked, "Dispatch, can you—" But the mic cut out. Nothing but static. I struck the mic twice more. Dead. My pulse thudded in the silence as another thought struck. The hatch of the truck's bed. I hadn't checked it. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I walked around to the back. The padlock was broken, swinging open. I crouched, flashlight inside, heart hammering. The bed was empty except for a long smear of mud and an impression like someone had knelt there. No tools, no crates, just that smear. I stood, revitalized by adrenaline. I would follow the mud trail out of the bed, see where it led. I stepped off the wooden tailgate into mud, boots sinking deeper than earlier. The smear continued past the bed into the field toward the fence. My light caught a thin thread of white fabric tangled on the barbs, no thicker than a strip torn from a shirt. I tugged it free. It unraveled into a short strip of cloth, damp and torn. I pocketed it with the glove and cufflink. They were clues, but pointing in what direction? I traced the mud back to where the truck had sat, and then across the highway toward the ditch. The ground was churned there too. In a storm, evidence meant little, but the mud looked fresh, deeper than the surrounding ruts. I followed it, flashlight beam shaking, until I reached the far edge of the asphalt where the shoulder dropped off sharply. The mud trail ended abruptly at a smear on the guardrail. My breath clouded in the beam. The guardrail had 2 dents, large enough to fit a person's torso, and scratch marks gouged the paint. Something heavy had been pressed against it. I leaned close, shining my light along the rail. The metal was slick with rainwater and smeared with earth tones. No blood, but a dark stain that might have been dark brown or crimson. My stomach clenched at the thought someone had been pinned here. I stepped back, knees weak, and glanced down the road. Nothing. Dead pavement, stretching into night. Then I heard it, a soft shuffling behind me, just beyond the road's edge. My beam whirled to the cornfield, slicing through rain and darkness. I held my breath. The shuffling came again, slow, deliberate. Not a cornstalk, but footsteps in sodden earth. "Who's there?" I called, voice thin, nearly drowned by rain. No answer. I clicked off the mic, flashlight shaking. The footsteps stopped. 4 seconds later, a whisper traveled over my shoulder, soft as breath. "You shouldn't be here." I spun, beam sweeping the field, but no one. My radio sprang to life. "Car 11-Alpha, come in." It was dispatch, faint but clear. Instinct had me clicking the mic, ready to reply, but I hesitated. They hadn't heard me call earlier. Their voice meant someone was listening. But what if the same interference that cut me off before was tied to whatever haunted this road? I swallowed, keyed the mic, and said, "Requesting." Static swallowed my words. The radio cut again. My legs buckled. Rain stung as I knelt, flashlight in one hand, radio in the other. I stared at the guardrail dents, the torn cloth I still held, the empty field. I felt exposed, vulnerable to unseen watchers in the stalks. The cufflink and glove seemed to burn in my pocket. Lightning flared directly overhead, and in that flash I saw him, standing 3 feet from me, a silhouette so close I could smell rain on his coat. He didn't move, didn't speak. The world snapped back to darkness, and he was gone. No footprints led to or from where he stood, only corn ruined by wind. I scrambled to my feet, backing toward the cruiser. My flashlight flickered, throwing long shadows over the asphalt. I didn't stop until my gloved hand hit the door handle. I shoved inside, door slamming, and fumbled for the keys. They were already in the ignition. My fingers shook as I started the engine. The dash cam blinked on at last, a sight that both frightened and relieved me. Whatever happened next would be recorded. I revved the engine and peeled out, showering gravel behind me. Rain whipped the windshield as I sped down the road, eyes flicking to the mirror for a glimpse of anything behind me. The fields blurred into streaks of green and brown. The radio crackled, alive at last, with the dispatch asking if I was okay. My hand hovered over the mic, but didn't answer. Because I couldn't explain the cufflink, the glove, the dented rail, or the man who'd vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. And as I hurtled toward town, headlight beams cutting 2 lines of sanity through the storm, I realized that some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, and that the road behind me would wait, hungry for the next patrol who heard its call. I sat in the driver's seat, engine humming under me like a caged animal, rain plastering the windshield until it became a smear of gray light. I gripped the wheel tight enough to burn my knuckles, chest heaving as if I'd just run a marathon. Dispatch's voice crackled through the radio, flat, distant, as though speaking from another dimension. I didn't respond. I needed time to think, to process the cufflink, the glove, the dented guardrail, and the man who'd materialized beside me in a flash of lightning. I pulled off the road onto the wide shoulder, turning off the engine. Silence fell again, thick as the storm. I retrieved the duffel bag, glove, and cufflink from the back seat, my flashlight beam wavering as I swept the fleeting artifacts into the cab. Rain leaked through the door seams, pooling at my feet. I closed my eyes, resting my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to muster enough calm to drive back to the station. But the steering wheel felt alive beneath my pulse, warm, pounding. I pressed my face into my sleeve, tasting the acrid scent of sweat and vinyl. When I finally rallied, I restarted the cruiser, headlamps stabbing through the downpour. The road was slick, reflecting the amber glow of my lights in long, wavering ribbons. As I drove, each passing mile felt unreal, like I was speeding through a dream I couldn't wake from. My mind replayed everything. The sudden whistle of wind through the radio speaker at the guardrail. The man's silhouette so close I could have touched him. Something had been watching me all along, orchestrating these glitches of equipment and vanishing footprints. My training screamed at me to lay down evidence, to report the malfunctioning radio and dash cam, to call for supervisors. But something deeper, pride, fear, instinct, kept me silent. If I spoke too soon, I'd lose control of this story. It needed unraveling on my terms. I reached the station at 1:02 a.m., lights blazing against the wet pavement. The parking lot was empty except for my cruiser and one unmarked SUV I didn't recognize. No station cars at the curb, no uniformed officers pacing the front. I hesitated at the door, rain dripping from my collar. Then I drew my breath, wrists heavy with the weight of the cufflink and glove, and crossed the threshold. Inside, the station smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. Harsh fluorescent lights overhead, linoleum floors scuffed by constant foot traffic. I headed straight for the evidence locker, keying the code with numb fingers. There was a dim glow behind the glass doors. I opened them, stepped inside, and shut the locker behind me. The lights clicked off, leaving me in near darkness, only the red exit sign and my flashlight cutting a thin beam into piles of plastic evidence bags. I pulled the duffel bag and cufflink from my pocket, setting them on a metal shelf. My beam caught them. The glove, crusted with mud, and the cufflink, its H, glinting under the flashlight as though mocking me. I reached for the evidence labels, ready to tag them, but the labels stuck together, no adhesive, no text. I peeled one free with a curse, leaving a sticky mess on my glove. Frustration flared. I tapped the shelf light switch. Nothing. The overhead fluorescent strips remained dark, as if someone had pulled the switch on the entire station. My radio squawked again, frantic. Car 11, Alpha, respond. I flicked it to life, voice wavering. I'm in evidence. Equipment malfunctioning. Need tech support. Static roared back. The radio died. My breath froze in the cold air inside the locker. The city padlocked me in without warning. I rattled the locker door. It stayed shut. Panic rose in my chest. I jerked my flashlight toward the lock mechanism. No one had tampered with it. The bolt was extended and solid. I hunkered down, heart hammering, as if my handcuffs had been snapped shut around me. Then the radio clicked on one last time, almost. Inaudible. Shelf. 5. Bottom. I leaned in, shining my light across the shelves. Row 5, bottom shelf. A single cardboard box labeled Unclaimed Evidence, 2010. It didn't belong to me. I hadn't ordered it. The box was dusty, neglected, as though it hadn't been opened in years. My name was nowhere on it. My gloved hand shook as I reached for the box. The cardboard hissed under my fingers, wet from condensation. I pried it open. Inside lay a single photograph. An officer's badge, mine. The photo was old, the metal faded, but the engraving was unmistakable. Officer Mallory, badge number 4372. Beneath it, on the photo's date stamp, was November 14th, 2018, 2 years ago. I tore the picture free, heart hammering as I recognized my own face. Younger, less worn, eyes bright instead of hollow. A scrawl on the back read, "You should not have come back." My flashlight flickered, the battery draining in the oppressive darkness. I yanked my service flashlight from my belt, brand new, unused. I clicked it on and off. Dead. Then I realized all my lights were failing. The station had no power, like the road had no reception. Someone was controlling the world around me, shutting me down, isolating me, staging these moments where humanity and equipment folded away. I heard footsteps outside the locker, a slow, deliberate scrape of shoe soles on tile. My blood froze. I pressed myself flat against the shelf, heart slamming. The footsteps stopped at the locker door. A bar of red light shone through the crack. A voice, low and familiar, whispered, "You found out too much." It wasn't the radio voice. It was soft, barely above the hum of my own breath, too close to be outside the door. I reached for my holstered weapon. My fingers went through cold air. The holster was empty. I dropped my sidearm at the scene in my rush to collect evidence. Or it had been taken. Panic turned to ice-cold clarity. Someone had been here, inside the locker, before me. Someone who knew my name, my badge number, my history. Someone who placed that box exactly so I'd discover it now, at this hour, alone and powerless. I swallowed hard, forcing my breath slow. The footsteps moved away, back down the hallway. I didn't dare follow. Instead, I pressed my ear to the locker door, listening to receding prints and then silence. Instinct told me to flee, to kick the locker door, tear it down if I had to. But adrenaline had drained my strength. I sank to my knees, flashlight beam wobbling across the badge photo in my hand. November 14th, 2018. What had I forgotten that night? What had been buried in evidence until tonight? The box's tag said unclaimed evidence, but evidence of what? Who left the glove, the cufflink, the duffel? Who orchestrated a midnight dog call that led me to the pickup, the guardrail, the figure at the fence? It was a maze laid for me alone. I curled into the shelf, clutching the cufflink, glove, and photo against my chest. Each item whispered back fragments of a puzzle I couldn't solve, a missing person, an abandoned case, a mission unresolved. My radio crackled again, impossible given its death at the scene. This time, instead of dispatch, I heard my own voice, shaking, distant. "Help me, please." Then static. Then nothing. The bunker of metal shelves and locked doors felt like a tomb. Somewhere in the station, the lights flickered back to life. Too late for cameras, too late for radios. By the time the overhead fluorescents hummed on, I was gone. The locker swung open, empty except for the dusty box. On the floor lay a single black glove, turned palm up, and beside it, the blood-smeared cufflink. No officer inside, no sign of struggle, only a smear on the tile, mud tracks leading back to the hallway. And somewhere down the dim corridor, a badge gleamed in the reflection of the light as if pinned by an invisible hand to the wall. My badge. Officer Mallory, number 4372, waiting for me to remember what I'd left behind. I slipped out of the squad room with the box in hand, footsteps echoing hollowly in the deserted hallway. The station's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright by comparison to the chill that had settled into my bones. I kept the box clutched against my chest, moving down the corridor that led toward the exit bay. My service pistol felt impossibly heavy against my hip, tucked, secured, and completely inaccessible without the holster release. I hadn't put my hands on it since the duffel bag at County Road 17, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I'd needed it, someone had stashed it elsewhere. I reached the glass doors dividing the station interior from the garage. Through the fogged window, I saw my cruiser parked beneath a single overhead lamp, rainwater pooling beneath its tires. I tried the door handle. It rattled, but didn't turn. The doors were electronically locked. A keypad guardrail barred my way. Whoever had shut down the power at the evidence locker must have overridden security, protocols throughout the building. My heart kicked against my ribs. I pressed my palm to the glass, tracing raindrops sliding downward. I retraced my steps to the evidence locker, reasoning that if my radio and dash cam had been forcibly misused, I might find clues in the locked rooms I'd passed. In my grip, the cufflink and glove jolted against each other, a metallic collage of terror and uncertainty. I opened the locker door, now powered again, the lights humming, only to find the dusty box gone. The cardboard lay crushed on the locker floor, shards of tape and cardboard fragments scattered as though someone had torn it open and removed its contents in haste. I scanned the shelf. No photograph, no cufflink, no glove. Emptiness. My pulse leapt into my throat. Someone had slipped in behind me, followed me down the corridor, and taken the box. I spun outside the locker, catching only the end of a figure rounding the corner toward the briefing room. A tall silhouette in a drenched uniform, no badge visible, no identifying numbers, disappeared behind the closed door. I gave chase, nearly tripping over my own boots in the rush. Inside the briefing room, the fluorescent light stuttered as I burst through the door. The table stood empty except for a handful of printed memos, shift assignments, missing person flyers, the usual bureaucracy. No one else was there. My breath rasped in my chest. I pounded on the tabletop with one fist. Papers rattled and fell. My radio crackled once, long and low, then died. I wrenched open the closet where I'd kept my rain jacket, threw it on, and dug my cell phone from the pocket. No service, nothing but no signal. My fingertips hovered over the power button before I realized calls wouldn't go through anyway. Deep down, I knew leaving the station might strand me outside, alone in a storm. But staying meant confronting whoever was orchestrating all this, and I had nothing, no evidence. Nothing to prove what was happening. I yanked open the briefing room door and walked into a chaos of empty hallways. Lights flickered, then steadied, as if powered by a trembling generator. I followed the sound of the wind whistling through the open bay doors and found myself back in the garage. The metal doors were partially raised, just enough to let the wind whip through. I could see wet pavement outside, a dark ribbon leading away from the station and back toward town. My cruiser was gone, stolen. The only vehicle inside was the unmarked SUV I hadn't recognized earlier, parked in the far corner with tinted windows and no license plate. I approached it slowly, flashlight scanning the wheel wells, the chassis. The engine was running, idling quietly. I could see through the windshield the reflection of fluorescent lights glimmering on the dashboard. On the passenger seat lay a black duffel bag identical to the one I'd found at the scene. Canvas frayed, strap broken. My duffel, the one I'd placed in evidence, was here. Inside must be my glove and cufflink and that photograph. My evidence corrupted and commandeered. My breath froze. I called out, "Stop right there!" But no one answered. The garage's echo swallowed my voice. I climbed into the SUV, opener looming above me. The air inside smelled of damp cloth and ozone. I tugged open the bag, hands trembling, and found the leather glove, stark and mud-caked, and the cufflink, its silver surface smeared with old, half-dried blood. Under them lay the photograph of my own badge, glinting in the gloom. I pulled it free. The scrawl on the back had changed. The first time, it read, "You should not have come back." Now it read, "Now you will never leave." My flashlight flickered and died. The emergency lights overhead in the garage went dark. I was swallowed by blackness. I fumbled for my radio. When it lit again, dispatch's voice was in my ear, even though I hadn't keyed the mic. "Car 11 Alpha. Respond, state your status." I pressed my palm to the cool fabric of the duffel bag, weighted against the empty silence around me. Rain lashed the pavement through the open bay doors. Thunder rumbled outside. My fingers brushed the glove in the bag. I yanked it free and held it up to the windshield, expecting to see a reflection of someone behind me. But the glass was empty, the SUV idling alone in the storm-lashed garage. Then, in the corner of my vision, I caught something moving beyond the open bay. A dark shape hovering under the street lamp's glow. I turned my head, heart in my throat, and saw the silhouette of a man wearing a rain-soaked uniform, but moving with an unnatural stillness, as if carved from shadow. He raised a gloved hand and pointed directly at me. My mind screamed to run, to escape, to use my pistol, even as I remembered I no longer had one. I hurled myself back into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. I fumbled for the ignition, and the vehicle roared to life. The lights flickered on the glossy hood ornament, casting a tunnel of light out into the night. I jammed the SUV into drive and shot through the bay doors, water spraying in my wake. The station receded behind me, its doors slamming shut of their own accord. The tires screamed over wet concrete as I raced onto the street, passing milepost markers that blurred past. I glanced in the rearview mirror. My cruiser's headlights were following me, though it hadn't been inside. They flickered with the same broken rhythm as my flashlight had, and then, one by one, they died. Now, only my headlights pierced the storm, carving twin lanes of safety into the darkness. But I knew safety was an illusion. I held the glove and cufflink in my hand, photograph pinned to the dashboard by my breath's mist. The road stretched ahead, endless, haunted, hungry, and in the rearview mirror I saw it, a shape perched on the roadside guardrail, watching me disappear into the storm, waiting for my return. I pressed the accelerator harder and whispered, voice hoarse and trembling, "I'll find you." But as the tires cut through puddles and thunder rattled above, I realized the truth I refused to face. Some roads don't lead anywhere but deeper into the darkness, and some ghosts are the living ones who guard them. And now, on this merciless night, I knew I'd become one of them. I didn't dare look in the mirror again until I cleared the city limits. The SUV's tires hissed through ankle-deep water as I tore along the highway, the cufflink and glove heavy in my lap, the photograph taped to the dash flicking in and out of view with every jolt. My hands shook so badly I gripped the wheel with white knuckles, every nerve screaming that I was still surrounded. By rain, by darkness, by something that had followed me out of the station. I found myself steering toward County Road 17, the scene of the first disappearance, as though pulled by gravity. The rain eased to a mist by the time the highway met the lonely two-lane, and the SUV's headlights cut twin beams through low fog. The guardrail where I'd seen the dents lay to my right, silver ribbons smudged with mud. My heart thundered. If I could just understand that smear, if I could trace it back, I might break whatever loop had been laid for me. I pulled off at the same milepost, engine idling low. There was no sign of the pickup now, no faint glow of hazard lights. Only the wet field, its rows of corn dripping under the mist. I climbed out, boots sinking in gravel, and carried the glove and cufflink toward the fence. The cufflink pressed cold against my palm. I knelt at the guardrail and ran my flashlight beam along the bends. The dents hadn't healed. They stared back at me like empty eye sockets. A rustle came from the fields. My breath caught. I swept the light through the stalks. Nothing moved, only the corn, bending as though a breeze whispered through. I took the leather glove in one hand and pressed its palm to the rail beside the biggest dent. The mud left a smear on the glove's finger, an echo of that night's smear. Then I heard a voice behind me, soft, clipped, unmistakably my own. "You're home." I froze. I spun, but there was no one. Rain slithered down my collar. My radio, silent these past hours, crackled once more. "Officer Mallory, do you copy?" It was dispatch again, but the voice was gone before I could answer. Static and then nothing. I pressed my ear to the black speaker, half expecting the speaker to crackle with more than radio waves, some confession or threat, but it stayed dead. I let the glove slip from my hand. It fell onto the gravel, fingers splayed as if reaching. I stared at it, then looked up to the field, and there, in the second row of corn, I saw movement. A flash of neon yellow police caution tape. Impossible, because no tape should be here. Yet it wafted between the stalks, spelling out a path into the fields. My pulse surged. I fought instinct to turn back, to run for the safety of lights and phones. Instead, I stepped forward, toward the tape, toward whatever waited at the end. Every step into the cornfield muffled my thoughts. The tape led me 50 feet in, then another 50, weaving through the rows as if guiding me deeper into a maze. My flashlight danced over torn stalks, revealing nothing but endless green and silver droplets. Then I saw it. The pickup's grill, moss-covered, half submerged in mud where no road should be. My rig had vanished in the storm, but the old truck, rotting, abandoned, stood testament that I'd come full circle. I reached the truck, heart hammering so hard I felt it in my throat. The driver's door hung even wider than before. I pressed my hand to the chipped paint. The dash was empty, the seat damp. In the center console lay a small folded paper. Hands trembling, I unfolded it. My own handwriting, neat and deliberate, dated November 14th, 2018, the night in the evidence locker. The message read, "Remember where it began." I reeled back. The date flashed in my mind. The badge photo, the scrawl, the missing year of my career. Years that I had no record of, files missing from my personnel folder. My memory spun, a stack of case files I misplaced, nights I'd thought I'd spent at home but had no proof of, interviews I'd conducted alone with no partner, no documentation. I collapsed against the truck, rain soaking through to my skin as the weight of realization crushed me. I wasn't just haunted. I was the architect of this unraveling. In erasing evidence and chasing ghosts, I had sacrificed parts of myself, my memory, my badge, my identity, to keep something buried. The caution tape snapped in the mist behind me. I turned, flashlight beam catching a figure stepping into the doorway of the truck bed. Me, younger, fresh-faced, uniform crisp. He pushed his own reflection aside and climbed down, handing me my service pistol, unholstered, unused, gleaming cold. I stared at him, speechless. He tipped his head. "Finish it." Thunder cracked overhead. I closed my eyes and felt first fear, then understanding. The road, the station, the evidence, all were part of a trial I'd been too afraid to face. And now the final verdict rested in my hand. I lifted the pistol as the rain stilled, field silent but for my ragged breathing. I could fire once, erase this doppelganger, reclaim my life, or I could turn the barrel on myself, atone for the vanished years, the missing files, the people I'd failed. I opened my eyes. The younger me was gone. Only the damp cornfield remained, waiting. I stepped over the threshold of the truck cab, feeling the earth give way beneath me. Thunder rolled for the last time as I raised my eyes to the sky, and I understood that the road never ends, because I'm the one who paved it. The morning light found me still seated in the driver's seat, the pistol heavy in my hand, the storm's final tremors rolling across the fields like distant thunder. County Road 17 disappeared behind me, swallowed by mist and memory. For a moment, I thought I'd left everything there: the cufflink, the glove, the scarred guardrail, the pieces of my own forgotten history. But in my lap lay the pistol, and in my mind lingered the echo of that younger version of myself, offering the weapon as both key and curse. I drove back toward the station without headlights, letting the twilight guide me. The road was unfamiliar now, no mile markers, no abandoned pickups, only the hush of dew settling on cornstalks. My pulse slowed to a patient tap as I realized I carried more than a weapon. I carried years of missing evidence, missing time, missing life. With each mile, the edges of my identity felt less secure. The uniform I wore no longer fit the shape of the man behind it. Protocol and procedure folded away under the weight of memory's revelations. When I reached the station parking lot, empty but for the unmarked SUV, I killed the engine and paused. The pistol rested on my thigh, metal cold against my skin. The evidence locker stood behind reinforced glass, its door sealed by now obsolete locks. I could return inside, file a report, confess to everything. I could hand over the cufflink and glove as proof, surrender the pistol as admission, and step into a clear, sanctioned consequence. Or I could drive away, erase the station from my rear view, scatter the physical proof into some backroad ditch, and become the phantom I'd chased all these weeks. My reflection in the side mirror blurred as I wrestled with the choice. I thought of every unanswered call, every broken radio, every displaced file. I thought of the families of those who vanished. Did they sense the same hollow in their bones that I felt in mine? The stories I told others were built on half-truths, on the glossing over of details that didn't fit the neat narrative. In pursuing an external mystery, I had ignored the one inside me. A soft click broke my thoughts, the unmarked SUV's door opening. I glanced over, no one visible. Yet the engine's thrum was steady as though waiting. The tailpipe exhaled mist. I reached for the glove in my dash, its mud-streaked palm folded over the empty console. I pressed it to my cheek. The leather was cool and rough. In its creases lay the final clue. No name, no date, only the imprint of my own memories reversed. I closed my eyes and recalled November 14th, 2018. The night in the evidence locker when I first discovered the photo of my younger self. The message, "You should not have come back." I'd lost more than a shift that night. I'd lost years of record, nights I could no longer place, faces I should have helped but couldn't recall. The missing people, the abandoned vehicles, the dead radios, they'd all been breadcrumbs in a trail that led directly back to me, to the breach in my own mind, slowly widening as I chased shadows. I opened my eyes. Dawn had broken fully now, pale light bleeding across the sky. The road ahead was empty. I eased the pistol onto the passenger seat, then lifted the glove and cufflink from the console and placed them beside it. They wouldn't vanish again. I let the window down and slipped each item out, feeling the glove's weight and the cufflink's cold dent against my fingertips before letting them fall into the gravel beside the tires. The glove wilted against the ground. The cufflink spun once and came to rest glinting in the sun. I sat for another moment, hands on the wheel, watching as the evidence became part of the earth. No gravel dust rose, no wind scattered the cufflink. It lay still, as if claimed by the road itself. I closed the door quietly and turned the SUV around, engine waking at my touch. I drove away without headlights, magnificent in my anonymity, toward a life I would rebuild from fragments. But as the station faded behind me, its silhouette dark against the brightening sky, I felt the unmistakable tug of that younger self's promise. Finish it. I glanced in the rearview mirror reflexively, expecting to see his face, the reflection of my own fear and guilt. Instead, there was only the empty road stretching out under the morning sun. Yet I knew he was there, in every mile I traveled, in every doubt I silenced, in every memory I chose to reclaim, or to bury forever. And in that moment, I understood the final truth. Some roads don't lead away from darkness. They lead deeper into it, looping back until you face the part of yourself you fear most.